Hi, Dr. Jessica McLeese here, licensed clinical psychologist and certified sex therapist. And I recently had the opportunity to do about a 45-minute interview with Phil and Michelle of Connected Marriage. And their work over the last 15 years, they have worked with hundreds of couples, teaching them to have a more connected marriage and a more fulfilling intimacy. So you're going to want to check it out. In the interview, we talk about things such as failure-free sex, the differences in desires that men and women each have, and how the Bible gives us some incredible representations of what marriage is and how to have a fulfilling sex life. You're not going to want to miss this interview, so tune in right now.
I'm really glad that you guys are here today, and I'm excited to talk to y'all. So for those of you listening in, I got a chance to email Phil and Michelle about kind of what they do and what would be interesting to talk about. And one of the fascinating things that they wrote back to me in their email as a topic is about this marriage metaphor in the Bible. And basically what you guys were saying, that sex is part of the plan that actually foreshadows the relationship that God wants to have with us. Tell us all about that, because I find that really interesting.
You know, I think that we don't understand sex inside of the context of what it was, what I think the theological background is. Mm. So, you know, we're to be one flesh. But if you look at it broader, you know, what we have with God is a marriage. So I could go in and teach a lot on the Bible, what the Bible says about that. But basically, you know, there's two covenants in the Bible, you know, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And on Mount Sinai, you know, it says in Jeremiah that God said, you know, I've been a husband to you. I mean, God saw that as a marriage, and that's the marriage. So the marriage metaphor, that theme is repeated over and over in Scripture. And so in the Old Testament, but then in the New Testament, you know, we are the bride of Christ. So one of the very first things that John the Baptist said was that Jesus was coming as a bridegroom. Mm. And so that you know, his first miracle was at a wedding. So I think Jesus has come as a bridegroom. Now, if you understand some of the Jewish customs, it's really kind of interesting. So some of the customs, there were three parts to kind of the Jewish. There was the wedding, there's the betrothal, and then there was the preparation, and then there was the wedding feast.
Sure. So
that is what Jesus did when he came to earth. So the betrothal in the Jewish custom was usually the arranged marriages, oftentimes. So the bride and the groom got a chance to meet. And so they would get together, and then one of the customs was if the groom would offer the bride a glass of wine, and if the bride accepted his betrothal, she would take it and drink of it.
Oh, wow.
So then that was the acceptance of the betrothal, and that they were now betrothed to be married. And then the dowry had to be paid. So the price for the bride had to be paid. So really, when Jesus came, that was like the betrothal. So there's a theme even when the next covenant was given was at the Last Supper. And so when Jesus offers a cup of wine, in essence, he's saying, you know, will you be my bride? So there's an underlying theme of this marriage, which John had already said, this is the bridegroom that's coming. And so by drinking that, we are accepting his betrothal. And then the next part was preparation. So the groom would go away and prepare a place to live. And so that's what Jesus said, you know, I'm going away to prepare a place for you to live. And nobody would know when the wedding was. Only the Father would know. And when the preparation's done, the Father would say something. So that's exactly, you know, Jesus said, you know, only the Father knows when I'm coming back. And so the bride is to prepare herself for the surprise coming and the surprise wedding, which is what we, the church, are supposed to be doing, is preparing ourselves to be a spotless bride for when Jesus returns. And then in Revelation, it talks about this is the wedding feast. This is the marriage of the Lamb. So that was all foreshadowing the consummation of Jesus in the church. So in the physical realm, it's sex. That's how we consummate our marriage. So I don't know what that looks like, you know, in terms of Jesus and the bride, but I think that's a foreshadowing of the closeness that God wants to have. And so when you take sex outside of the covenant relationship and of the marriage bond, then it becomes something less. It becomes distorted.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear the kind kind of the traditions, I guess, of the time, and to understand how the Jewish people would have known exactly what Jesus was talking about when he was introducing these concepts similar to the wedding. And I think of the story he has where that's exactly what happens. Like the man goes and he prepares his home for his bride. And I'd always heard those stories, but it's interesting to think that people listening to Jesus would have known exactly what he was saying. They would have had this picture knowing this is what it looks like. They would have been able to piece that together pretty readily, I would think.
And think of how the Song of Solomon, the book of the Bible that we think is probably the most sexual, again mirrors that same story. She's waiting for her bridegroom, right?
Yeah.
She is anticipating his return. And I think that's an interesting allegory within that whole book, within that whole story of Song of Songs.
Yeah, that is. I like that. That's kind of what you were just saying, Phil, that somehow sex is also similar to what Christ has already shown us about himself. And it sounds like that could be a piece of it. Like you point out, Michelle, that we're reading all that already in Song of Solomon. You're right. The most probably seductive erotic book in the Bible. One that people are surprised sometimes is in the Bible, but it does show how important sex is in marriage because there's an entire book devoted to that. And then also it does absolutely show that picture of here's the bride waiting for her groom to come into the room.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely.
That's good stuff. I like that.
Yeah, I see, this whole marriage metaphors throughout Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start looking for it, you start seeing it. And I think that it's because it's the relationship that God wants to have with us. And God is lover. He's our lover. It's a relationship. It's a give and take. He woos us. We love him back.
Yeah.
That's the whole relationship. When you picture that, that's what marriage is meant to be.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of that. So I think it's cool, but.
Yeah, I do too. I agree. And I think so often, I was just having this conversation with someone the other day, actually, about how when we really understand what marriage is and why we have marriage, it is absolutely helpful for us to understand the character of God and who he is and his goodness and his kindness and his mercy. All of that we can see in relationship with one another.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And so then it's meant to, we need to learn how to love one another. And that's the marriage part of it is, it's tough sometimes, but we learn how to love one another.
It is tough sometimes. And what's funny to me about that is I've read blogs where people talk about how it shouldn't be so tough. I've worked with couples that feel like, well, if it's gotten really tough or difficult for us, then maybe we made a mistake and weren't supposed to get married to begin with. But if we talk real with one another, then we can say that actually marriage is tough and it takes some work. It's a refining and a perfecting that God is doing through or to us through one another in marriage.
Another thing that you reminded me of is 1 Corinthians 13, chapter 13, of course, the love chapter, and where it talks about love is kind and patient and forbearing and takes no record of wrongs, and etc. And we have talked before about how if we really could use that verse as the standard of what a marriage would look like, that if as we work that out, because those are all really action words, it's not about giddy feelings and thinking all day long about this person. It's about choosing very deliberate ways of acting out. And I think it is through that we actually develop the fruits of the Spirit, which is again part of why marriage is an excellent allegory for the relationship that God would want to have for us. Because in a marriage that's working, you are kind and you are patient, and you're not as likely to keep that mental checklist of what you've done wrong or how you've what you owe me, what the debt is. And I think that is also then part of what builds our gentleness and self-control that comes out of the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. And I kept having that picture that you described, Phil, of the bride the betrothed taking that cup and going ahead and drinking out of it to say, yes, I give myself to you. How often we have to do that in marriage, though? It's that continual, oh, yes, I do give myself to you. And I don't mean just in sex. I mean in general, in your relationship, saying, I will give of my own self, my own desires, my own hopes, so that we can be in unity and we can do this life together.
Right. You're talking about really that us thinking rather than me versus you thinking.
Absolutely.
And that's an ongoing commitment. I think marriage is, but so we think of commitment of, I took a vow to, love and honor you, the rest of the life, whatever. In really, that is not about just not getting divorced. It's about choosing to love. Every day.
Mm-hmm.
It might be choosing to be patient, or holding my tongue, or I'm going to do my best here in this situation, even though we're in conflict.
And it might also mean having difficult conversations rather than holding your tongue.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I love that. What you just said about that means more than just choosing not to divorce, because staying married just for the sake of, well, this is what God tells us to do. I don't think that's really the spirit of the word at all, because the becoming one isn't, well, we're not going to leave one another. Like that's definitely not what was meant when we were told we're supposed to form our lives together and love each other and be kind to one another. 1 Corinthians 13, like you said, that two becoming one. Also, you can't do that just by staying together in the same home.
Right. Absolutely.
So much deeper than that. One of the other things that you guys had mentioned is about the marriage bond being a commitment, relationship, and physical, and that sex is something more than physical. I 100% agree with that. Let's have a conversation about that more than physical part with sex.
Go ahead.
Oh. Yeah, so, well, one that, it says that's, what it said in Genesis, you leave your father and mother, it's a commitment, you're bonded to one another, and then you two become one flesh. So there's this, I think, commitment in the relationship and then the physical, but it's not, so right now I'm sitting next to Michelle, and, to get on the camera, we're touching each other, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of the physical part of it, is, I just don't do that with other people.
He's probably sitting closer to me than he would someone else, right?
Sure.
He can be in my space, where in a way that no one else really can.
Yeah.
And it's not just a physical space. There is an emotional and spiritual space there as well, that he can touch me in ways that really are unique to this relationship.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of sensitive to touch from people. I don't care for it. I'll hug people at church, that's fine. But for instance, if I'm sitting on a plane, I don't like people on either side too close. It's weird for me. But that is different, obviously, with my husband. It's okay if we have that touch. Yes. Same thing in church, right? The seats are so close, but in church, same thing. I'm fine being close to my husband, but not just someone random sitting too close to me. So you're right. There's something different about that marriage covenant that allows that physical touching, not just sexual, but a connection that can only really happen in a committed relationship.
Right, yeah. Right. And that's where it's, frequently a reflection of what's happening in the relationship. So, yeah. As we feel, because when we feel emotionally connected, then we're better about being in each other's space.
Yeah.
We aren't feeling that connection. Suddenly it's like, don't touch me, get out of my space.
Yeah, absolutely. And since that's a reflection of our relationship with God, I can't help but think about how when we're feeling connected to him, so sin isn't getting in the way, we're not allowing our own selfish ambitions to get in the way, but we're dying to self and in relationship with him, I think it's that same way. We have a tendency to worship more fully and completely when we feel like we're actually connected to him. So if we're spending time getting to know him through prayer and Bible study, we just have more of a connection and an understanding of how he wants us to live. It's kind of like we understand him better and hear from him better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good point.
Yeah, that's great. That's excellent.
Yeah. So sex is more than physical. Let's talk a little about the emotional connection, because I really believe that the emotional connection grows stronger as couples are enjoying their intimacy and focusing on making their sex life better.
I agree. I think that the two influence each other.
Mm-hmm.
So the you having a good relationship and feeling that emotional bond and that connection actually, helps your sex life.
Mhm.
But your sex life can also help your relationship.
Yeah.
And the same with commitment. So we teach, there's 3 different parts to that. And, and the more committed you feel, the better it's going to help you with the sex and the relationship. But the sex can also help you with your commitment.
Mhm.
So they influence each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And typically when there's like if the sex life isn't going great and couples don't feel like they're connecting, it's not just in sex. They're going to feel like they're disconnected emotionally. They're going to feel disconnected probably spiritually. So not praying for one another, not trying to fight one another's battles. And sometimes intellectually feeling disconnected. We don't talk, we don't communicate. So you're right. All of those things influence one another and come together to build that relationship that you have.
It does.
Right.
Definitely.
Right.
That's good stuff.
And we found that when couples will work on one aspect of their relationship, it will positively influence the others as well. And so even if, so we've gone through seasons where my sexual desire was inhibited because of some medication I was on and because of surgery that I'd gone through. And that was really frightening to me because my body wasn't responding the way that it used to, or the way that it had. And I was scared that it might never come back. I was afraid of what Phil was feeling. And fortunately, we were in a pretty good relationship space then where I was able to share these fears with him, and he was able to hear it without dismissing or fixing or pretending it was like no big deal. And and so we were able to talk about where I was at.
Yeah.
And that really helped to allay my fears. And so that we were able to really kind of make some changes to what we were doing, and kind of live with the gravity of the situation, like accept that, okay, this is the way it is for now. And I had to choose to be physically intimate with my husband because that desire wasn't there. Right. But I knew how important that was, not only to him, but to me too, to still need that connection, even though that the thing that I had grown up with of that urge, that desire, was missing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of couples go through seasons, and sometimes their entire marriage, for some couples, where they don't align sexually like that. Desire levels will be different from one another. And it's not always the woman either. There's some
not.
Say that around 33% of marriages, it can actually be the man who has the lower desire. And that in no way means that the man is stepping out or involved in some kind of sexual sin. And I think sometimes women think that because these cultural messages tell us that it's always the woman that's going to have lower desire. But no matter who has the lower desire, it's important to try to figure out how can we still come together and enjoy our sexual relationship. And it sounds like you guys definitely walked through that season. And one of the things you would recommend is really good, strong communication around that.
Yes.
Well, it's the way it is, and you have to just be honest with one another and talk about it. And it's like, this is what I'm feeling. And it's, I recognized, I knew it was from the surgery and the drugs, but she really didn't have any desire to have sex, but you did because you knew it was important to me.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because I've heard at times where someone will kind of almost kind of pull back from a discussion like that and get a little bit worried about it, because I think sometimes women hear that it is okay to go ahead and pursue your husband and pursue sex, even if you're not in the mood. And I think sometimes women, and maybe more so for women that have been through sexual trauma, feel like that's a place where they're being told your needs don't matter and it doesn't matter how you're feeling, just give your husband sex. And I don't really feel like that's the message that you're trying to say at all. And I don't think it's a healthy message to say that.
I totally understand where someone who has gone through a sexual trauma is coming from. and or even that social pressure or that pressure to perform, where you need to give me this, or you should be giving your husband this. And I don't like shoulds. And so I really want to be cautious about that part of I want to be cautious specifically for that woman that is feeling like she is being told she must have sex with her husband. You must give this to him to keep him, that kind of thing. That is not the message I want to convey. I knew that I wanted to be intimate with my husband, even though my that desire wasn't there. And I don't think we hear that message very much.
Right.
That you can have sex without first feeling horny, or
Sure.
without first feeling some heat somewhere or something, whatever that either emotional or physical stimulus is, that we can be intimate with our partner, with this person that we are very close to in other ways. But I do also think that we talked about these other parts of the bond. And if that bond is suffering in other areas like commitment and relationship, and you start by trying to fix the sexual aspect of it, I think that could be really tough for a lot of, not only women, but I think men too. And so maybe it's time to focus on the relationship and the commitment and rebuilding those. And as that positive interaction builds, that you can choose to be close or to touch. Even the non-sexual touch is really important. And if you're not able to have that non-sexual touch, I would say we need to focus on the relationship as a whole, what's healthy, and what are you doing to really build that bond.
Yeah, agreed.
But let me speak from a male perspective. So I think that there's kind of a sense of, well, you need to have a great relationship to have sex. But I know that there's a lot of men that sex is what helps them to feel emotionally connected.
Mm-hmm.
So that they use the sex in order to feel connected to their spouse. So it's a both end. I mean, you have to work on both of them.
You do. And it's interesting because when the man is needing that sexual release, and it's true because actually men release the greatest amount of oxytocin, which is that beautiful neurotransmitter we call the cuddle hormone. So it makes you feel bonded and close and connected. And men release it to the greatest degree at orgasm, which is why sex feels more connecting. Where for women, they release it to a much greater degree at foreplay or cuddling or hugging one another or these long romantic talks than they do at orgasm, which is interesting because when couples feel disconnected, a lot of times the man will pursue. And again, this is generally speaking, sometimes those roles are reversed, right. But a lot of times the man will pursue, I need sex from you because I need to know we're good and I want to be connected and I love you. And the woman hears, you're only using me. I just want to chill. I just want to hug you and hold you. I don't want sex because that doesn't feel connecting. And it causes such a tension. So there we go back again to that mutual sacrifice that we have for one another, trying to give to one another's needs, not out of obligation, but because that's how you love well.
So I think in all of that, it's keeping, well, what is it we're trying to do? Are we trying to build our bond? So it's more than just, yeah, I want to have sex tonight. What's going to help you to actually build your relationship? And maybe having sex tonight is what's going to help build the relationship. But if it's done, so where both people need to have that mutual self-sacrificing and kindness and gentleness and patience and self-control sometimes, and but it builds a relationship. It builds the bond.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, again, you guys had mentioned at the beginning, even how sex is a picture really of our relationship with God. And I think a lot of times we try to figure that out and what it means, but it reminds me of how Paul said about this is a mystery. We don't totally get it, but we know that there's some symbolism here, and there's some things that help us understand more about who God is. We just don't necessarily know all the words to put in place for that.
Right, exactly right.
Which makes it, to me, even more of a spiritual exercise. So I've heard some really great teaching on how sex can become an act of worship to God, and taken in the wrong context, of course, that could sound really crazy and perverted and dirty. But the reality is, when we give ourselves to one another, not out of obligation, but out of, I love you and I want to connect with you, and I know that this helps. When we give ourselves to one another, it's very much a picture of how our spiritual walk should be. So Mama Christ didn't all about me.
Right. I totally agree. I do think that there is this very spiritual aspect to orgasm, really. I mean, I think that it is, I don't have any empirical evidence, I know, but it is such an incredible experience of giving and receiving at the same time, that it feels like there is a spiritualness to it that we've dismissed in our current what are we in, our
Postmodernism, kind of
postmodernism. Yeah. I think we've started to say, well, it's just sex. Like it's like eating a donut. There's no big deal here. There's no connection, no intimacy, no residual impact. And I think it's foolish.
It is. Now, I don't know if this is true, and maybe y'all can help me theology-wise, but I've heard before that Song of Solomon, like back in the days, you actually had to be a certain age to read it. Like it wasn't just that it was freely given. Okay, so that's true. Well,
Yes.
When you take that and you look now at our world today, where either one of us could go drive on the freeway and we're going to see billboards that make you think about sex. Like sex has become, like you said, it's like eating a donut. Do it whenever you want to, however you want to, with whoever you want to.
Right.
And so we've cheapened sex so much that it makes it really hard to see it from that spiritual perspective, when that was a portion of why it was created. I don't think it was the only reason it was created, but what a cool way for God to help us understand him better.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a challenge. So one of the things that we've done on a survey is we ask people, is it easy for you to think of sex as something that's pure and holy? And about 40% of people really have a difficult time thinking that way. That because our sex has been, you talked about, it's just something physical, it's been degraded as, there's not something valuable and pure and holy about it. And so like when we even talked about, praying during sex or before sex, people look at us kind of odd.
And I'm 100% for that, for praying both before sex, after sex. I've known of couples who struggle with infertility where they're prayed beforehand that, God will give them a baby, but that also at the same time that won't be their focus during that moment. I've definitely encouraged couples that are feeling disconnected or feeling like, I work with couples that have gone years sometimes of having no sexual connection whatsoever, and then trying to figure out how to have sex again. And it's actually pretty terrifying for couples to get to that place of being that vulnerable again. And so I've suggested that pray before you have sex, pray before you talk about sex, like sit down and have those conversations. And if your mind is wandering during sex, pray that God will bring you back and help you focus on the moment and enjoy that time. And I absolutely agree that not only is it okay, but I think it's smart to do. It's one way also where we can, even in our sex lives, where we can say, okay, God, thank you for this gift. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But it still isn't just about me. This has far-reaching implications of even my life with you.
Yes.
So, we teach marriage classes, and that's one of our points is, God wants you to have mind-blowing sex.
Yeah.
I mean, he does. He wants you to have great sex with your spouse.
I agree. And it goes back to, you were saying a little while ago, Michelle, how, both of us were talking about it, how trauma can impact people sometimes. where women can feel this obligation, or the spouse with the lower desire. Men are traumatized often also. It's about 1 in 6. So these are huge numbers. And those things can make us get to the point where we feel like it's an obligation and it's not fun and it's not enjoyable. But I agree with you. That's not the way God ever intended it.
No.
Really, the way God intended it is that it would be, one man and one woman, and that would be where all of your experiences lie. And so it creates a bond and excitement, and it should have never been something wrapped in trauma or abuse or any kind of negative feelings like that, or negative consequences.
Right. And I think what happens is when we have gotten to a place in our society where, you mentioned the billboards that we can drive by, or commercials, or magazines, everything. There's all these different areas of media where we are sexually bombarded, and so we have sex forced on us. Mm-hmm. And as women, we know what that feels like, for someone to force themselves into our the sexual aspects of our lives, whether that's a kiss or a visual or a touch. All of those things hurt us. And it changes our perspective on sex, on what it is. And that's why I love the idea of sex within a marriage, where you have already given consent to give your total self to this person. So we know there's consent ahead of time. Yeah. And that's why that commitment is such a critical aspect of the bond, because you are saying, yes, I choose to give myself to you. And so there isn't that forcing of sexuality on you in any way.
Yeah. And when we come together, it's also a consent all over again too. So it's not a, well, I said yes once and so we're good to go. Like, it's a constant growing together, constant, I still give myself to you. And sometimes that means sex. Sometimes that means we're going to have this hard conversation, or we're going to talk about forgiveness, or we're going to talk about the ways we need to change.
And sometimes it means, okay, I am choosing to have sex with you, even though it's not going to be all that great.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to be a 10. I know I'm probably not going to orgasm, but I'm still choosing to have sex with you, or I'm choosing to give myself to you in this way.
Yeah. So maybe you can speak a little from the man's point of view on this, Phil, because I've heard sometimes guys say, well, if you're just choosing to have sex, then I'm not interested. This is, in couples counseling.
Yes.
So not guys in general. So if you're choosing to have sex, I'm not interested. And the wife will try to explain, no, I'm choosing because I love you. And this is actually an act that I want to give you. But I've still run into a lot of guys in the couple relationship that'll tell their wives, no, that's not good enough. I want you to really be into this. Can you speak to that some and maybe help guys understand what that means to have that actual gift of giving?
Well, I think so. What you actually referring to is really interesting. I think there's a misconception that men just, it's just about a physical thing because you have like needs, or something, because your testosterone is high and you're horny. Men want a connection. Mm-hmm. They want that. So I think that's great. So there's been times when it's like, when I've said to Michelle, well, if you're kind of not in the mood, I guess we can wait for tomorrow. I'd rather you be in the mood. Now, I recognize I don't have a problem. She goes, no, I just she went this whole time when she didn't want, her body wasn't cooperating. She didn't have any desire for sex.
Yeah.
And, I would want to have sex, and she would say, well, I'll do it because I love you. Well, I appreciated that gift.
Yeah.
So that was great. I recognized that she did that kind of just out of self-sacrificial love. So did I still want her to want me? Of course. But I also understood where she was at and what she needed, in that she's trying to work with me. So we can set up these high expectations of, yes, I want you to be, madly hot for me. But in reality, it's just not real. That's not real all the time.
But Shanti Feldman had some research on men still want to be wanted.
Well, 97% of men want to be wanted.
Yeah.
That's not just about sex. They want to be wanted.
So in that case where the wife isn't in the place of, maybe, again, I can speak from this place of my body wasn't cooperating with me the way that I was used to it cooperating. And as much as I would have wanted that, it just wasn't something I could generate or create out of nowhere. And but I think I needed to make sure that Phil knew that I still wanted him as well, and in other ways.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception sometimes in men, and you can tell me from guys you've worked with if you see the same thing. But I think there's a misconception sometimes that if I'm not madly in love with you or want you right now, then that means I don't want you. When the reality is that's actually not true. And I personally believe for a wife to say, I'm not into sex that much, but I am into you and I want to be with you. So I want to give you this gift. It's really, for most women, I wouldn't say obligation, because when it's obligation, their voice tone is very different. And they say, well, okay, I know I need to because I don't want you looking somewhere else, or I know I need to because you need this. So it's actually a very different obligation when a woman says, no, I love you. And so I want to give this gift to you because I love you. And that's kind of a way, I think, for some women to say, I am pretty hot for you, even if I'm not really aroused right now.
So I see a parallel here, and you can correct me if you don't see this, but how often has a wife said, I want you to do this because you love me. I want you to give me flowers because you love me. I want you to do the dishes because you want to do the dishes. I think I see a parallel here.
I don't usually want to do the dishes.
Hey, most women don't want to do them either. I'll just throw that out there.
But I think there could be a parallel here in we want this person to read our mind in a way. We do want them to want it, but it's not a very realistic place. And when we set up that, we're setting up a conundrum. We're setting ourselves up for failure, and we're setting them up for failure at the same time.
Yeah. I think I love what you're saying there. So in my head, I was thinking, but I want you to ask me out to dinner because you really want to spend the money and go to dinner with me. When the reality is men and women do have different needs. And I mean, there's been books written about it, but every couple is kind of, they have to do their own thing and figure out what those needs are. But men and women are different from one another. And it's actually a gift to say, okay, I'm not much into this, but I'll do it because I love you. It's actually a huge gift in a way of sacrificing and saying, this is how much I love you. I'm willing to give up my own desires right now to be with you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think anytime you set yourself up of, I want you to want me, or I want you to like doing the dishes or something, you're just kind of setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I agree.
You set this weird expectation up, and I've learned, that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's so true. If only our expectations could come true most of the time. Although I think we can learn how to speak to those expectations in a healthy way where we can
definitely
love each other through them.
Yes, there's definitely, I love the language from Cloud and Townsend about needs versus wants, where they talk about, I need the dishes done, but we need the dishes done, but the way that you stack the dishwasher versus how I stack the dishwasher is a want, or it doesn't, both ways get the dishes done, and that's what's important. But you do it wrong and I do it right.
That's part of that team again, right? Because I think in most relationships, each person, if they're really honest with themselves, can say, oh, I know the things I'm better at. And maybe sometimes they're right, maybe sometimes they're not, but it comes down to that team effort. As a team, what can we do and do really well so that we can have a lot of enjoyment in our marriage?
Yes.
Right.
Fun stuff. You look like you were going to say something. Am I cutting you off?
No.
Okay.
He's probably just going to say that, no, his way of setting up the dishwasher is right.
I think you have to, keep your eye on what the goal is. What is it we're trying to accomplish? We need to have the dishes done, okay? But how they get done is probably less important.
That's so funny. It's true.
So I think a lot of times that's, in our relationship, we've learned to kind of think through, what do we really need versus what do we want?
Yeah.
Separate those two.
Yeah, I think that's good. This is not really in line with what we're saying. I'm taking a little bit of a curve here just because of time. I don't want to keep you guys forever. But there was a question or there was a statement that you guys made that I think would be helpful for us to talk about here for people listening. So you were talking about performance expectations, which we're actually talking a little about expectations now, but about how those performance expectations can kill the mood. And you guys said we believe in failure-free sex. Can you talk to that some and tell us what you mean?
Well, oh, did you want to start?
So yes, because let me give it
Okay.
a bit of a preamble. So I think that we were at one point in our relationship where I felt rejected. So I would always sit and I would like try to read Michelle, is she in the mood for sex or not? Because I didn't want to be rejected, because otherwise I'd bring it up and she'd go, no, I don't want to. And I didn't like that. So, but she was feeling the pressure to perform, like, well, we're going to have, this great sex. And so we set up a new rule, and we said, okay, I'll tell you what, either one of us can have sex anytime we want just by asking the other. But the other one can say, it'll just be bad sex. That's okay. So we're going to take away all the performance expectations. But then it got to the point of, oh, well, okay, so it took away the rejection, but it took away her performance pressure. And so then I would go, after a few times of just having bad sex, it's like, oh, well, I'd rather you be into it too. I mean, maybe we ought to do this tomorrow instead of now. So it gave us a point in time that we got over some of our issues.
Okay, so, and it helped me to recognize as well, I think both of us really, that, and we'd had, okay, I think that a lot of people that think that once you get married, well, actually, I've heard it both ways. Never mind. I'm gonna skip over that. I think that people have an expectation about sex always being pretty good. Like if you rated your encounter on a scale from 1 to 10, and with 10 being super great orgasmic sex and 1 not being that at all, of course, I think I went into marriage thinking, well, we will always be on the upper end of that scale. And so when we got to this place where I felt like we had to always be on that upper end of the scale, and I wasn't always able to do that then I was failing. And so to accept that we could have sex from 1 to 10, and it's okay for us to have sex that's really only a 1, a 2, or 3 sometimes. That neither of us really is all that into it, but we are, for whatever happened, or maybe you think you're going to be really into it, and then it just kind of doesn't go there.
Yeah.
And it's okay that you don't have to, and I'm not saying that you should start rating every section on a scale of 1 to 10. Yeah. But I think just having that realization of it's not going to be mind-blowing every time, or even every other time, that it's okay to have sex anywhere along that scale as far as what that encounter looks like.
Right. It's kind of the idea of good enough sex, right? So it doesn't always have to be mind-blowing, earth-shattering. And I think that's what hurts a lot of couples when they get married, and maybe they've waited until marriage, and they're like, well, the church teaches me it's going to be great after marriage, and that this is the way to do it. And then they get married and they wonder, well, how come it wasn't that great, or how come it's not that great often? And so I think that's so important to talk to say that it's okay to have those moments where it's not that great. I mean, if anyone's tired, if anyone's feeling a little bit sick, if you're stressed, there's all kinds of things that can come in and make sex not that great that time.
Right. Well, I know that men may, I don't know if all men orgasm every time, but I certainly know that not all women will.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. I just heard some new research on that, that when they're, yeah, this is crazy. I just heard that actually last weekend at the AACC conference. So it's the American Association of Christian Counselors. And the Pinners, they've been doing sex therapy for about 40 years now with couples. And they were saying that new research is actually showing that sometimes women have orgasms that are really small. They can't necessarily feel it in their body, but that's why they don't feel the tension of I need a release after sex. But they're just not aware enough of the orgasm actually occurring. Isn't that interesting?
I totally agree with that. I mean, I believe that there are times when we are so looking for the fireworks that we miss the fireflies. Like,
That's good.
Fireflies will just light up the sky some nights, and it's delicate and pretty. And I think sometimes we dismiss in our own bodies and in our own emotion these small little ways that we feel a level of excitement because it wasn't the light show that we were expecting at the 4th of July.
Yeah. And since we're going back to how all this reminds us of God, anyways, it makes me think of how oh man, who was it? Elijah, who comes out of the cave and he's listening for God, and there's a thunderstorm, and that's not where God is. And so there's this big expression of power, and then God was in the quiet stillness. And I think what a lovely picture of female sexuality that brings us back to that place of sometimes there's these moments, and sometimes there's moments that are sweet, and special, and gentle, and they're still every bit as good.
Absolutely. Really nice analogy. Love it.
Yeah, never heard of that. Applied that way.
On that sometime.
I might steal that one.
I was going to say, feel free to use it with your couples. That's totally okay.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, I like that.
Awesome. Guys, I so appreciate you being here for this. This has been fun, and it's been a good discussion, and I look forward to more of these discussions. I think we just need to do better in the church of bringing this kind of information to the forefront. You guys are doing that, and I think that's wonderful and fantastic, and I really pray that you guys reach a lot of people with this good information.
Thank you.
Well, we could sit and talk about this stuff all day long, so, you know.
Yeah, well, we could. I know. I don't want to steal all your time.
Well,
this is fun.
Inviting us to join you today.
Yeah,
this has been a
great.
blast.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it, guys. Well, we will connect again soon then.
Sounds good.
All right. Excellent.
Bye.